أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله الذي لا يبلغ مدحته القائلون ولا يحصي نعماءه العادون ولا يؤدي حقه المجتهدون الذي لا يدركه بعد الهمم ولا يناله غوص الفطن الذي ليس لصفته حد محدود ولا نعت موجود ولا وقت معدود ولا أجل ممدود أما بعد فقد قال الله الحكيم في محكم كتابه الكريم أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم إن الله عنده علم الساعة وينزل الغيث ويعلم ما في الأرحام وما تدري نفس ماذا تكسب غدا وما تدري نفس بأي أرض تموت إن الله عليم خبير صدق الله العلي العظيم صلوات اللهم صل على محمد وعلى محمد. For the love of our beloved Prophet and his beloved progeny, a second loud salawat. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ala Muhammad. For the hastening in the return of our beloved 12th Imam, a third final loud salawat. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ala Muhammad. Tonight the topic that we'll be discussing on this auspicious occasion of the 15th of Sha'ban and the birth of our beloved 12th Imam, Imam al-Mahdi, salawatullahi wa salamu alayhi, Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ala Muhammad, will be the topic of those who showed loyalty and or disloyalty towards the cause of the 12th Imam. When you look at the cause of the 12th Imam and the situation of the Ahlul Bayt throughout the different ages and eras of the 14 Ma'sumin, you will find their cause was more vulnerable or less vulnerable at different times, at different stages. And maybe the most vulnerable time of all was during this critical period of the minor occultation, or what we would refer to as al-ghayba as-sughra. Ghayba as-sughra was that period in which the Imam's only connection with the Shia and the followers was through the four representatives. And this time, it constituted a very critical and vulnerable time for the cause of the Ahlul Bayt. Their only way of communicating with the people and the community, of course, were these four representatives and the letters that are to be written between them and the Shia. And during this critical period, there were those who were loyal to the cause of the 12th Imam and therefore etched their name in history for all of the right reasons. And then there were also those who were extremely disloyal and betrayed the cause of the 12th Imam in the most vulnerable of situations, that is in the ghayba as-sughra, the minor occultation. Therefore, tonight we want to take some time to look at the characters of both of these types of individuals and see what lessons can be learned from those who were loyal and those who were disloyal. Normally, when we talk about loyalty and disloyalty, the event that comes to mind, the pinnacle of these two ideas, is the event of Karbala. When we talk about Karbala, those who were loyal, those who turned away from the third Imam, we all remember their names, we all know their stories. But the reality is every Imam had his own companions who were either loyal to him or showed disloyalty to him. For most of us, of course, we have never been around the Imam, have never lived during a time where you and I could have communicated with the Imam. For you and I, the only thing that we have seen is a time of ghayba and a time of occultation. Therefore, the narration says, for you and I, we are to await the return of the 12th Imam, sabahan wa masa'a, in the morning and in nighttime as well. But there were those who lived during his time, and some of them stuck to his cause, and some of them turned away from his cause. And there are many lessons to be learned from both groups of individuals. And inshallah tonight, in order to delve into this topic, we'll pose the following questions. Number one, what were the circumstances of the life of the 11th Imam and the 12th Imam like in terms of the surveillance that surrounded them and encircled their houses and their lives? Number two, who were the four representatives of the 12th Imam and what roles did they play? How were they able to create a connection between the Shia and the Imam of their time? Number three, what occupation did the first of these representatives take on as a cover in order to be able to receive and deliver the letters of the 12th Imam to the Shia and vice versa? Number four, which of these representatives was it who months before he was going to pass away dug up his own grave and prepared for his akhirah by sitting in the grave ahead of time and reciting verses of the Quran? Number five, what were the letters of the Shia that were delivered to the Imam and the Imam responded to? What were these letters about and what issues did these letters address? Number six, were there women who played a critical role during this time of the minor occultation or al-ghayba as-sughra as well? And number seven, and probably most important for all of us, which of the companions of the 12th Imam was it who started out as a very close companion of his, but eventually reached a point where he left the religion of Islam and the faith of Islam, and the 12th Imam wrote letters for him telling the other Shia that he is cursed and he has no connection with the 12th Imam anymore? And what lessons can we learn from the character of this individual? Tonight, inshallah, we'll delve into these 7 questions with a loud salawat ala Muhammadin wa ali Muhammad. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. Before we continue, inshallah, if we can have the brothers please move forward, as inshallah we don't want to stop the talk as the talk is going ahead. One more loud salawat and everyone can please move forward. Thank you. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ala Muhammad. Another loud salawat, please. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ala Muhammad. A third loud salawat. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ala Muhammad wa ajil faraj. The surveillance around the life and house of the 11th Imam and by extension the 12th Imam was something very, very severe and very harsh. This was a household that was already being monitored because of the likelihood and the chances that the Savior was going to be born into this house and into this household. Therefore, you find in the narrations the way the 11th Imam maneuvered this situation and how much precaution he took in who he showed his son, the 12th Imam, to, and who he kept his son hidden from. So you read in narrations, people used to come to visit Imam Hassan Askari. Not every person who came to visit the Imam had the ability and the honor and the tawfiq and the chance to actually meet his son that was already born. There were those who would come to the house and visit the house, and the Imam would never speak of any child of his that was born. There were those who would come who were closer to the cause, that then the 11th Imam, maybe for a glance or two, would give them the opportunity to see his son and his successor. And this is why we read in the narration, this man who came from the land of Persia and wanted to serve the household of the 11th Imam, when the 11th Imam saw him and greeted him, he did not speak to him of any child that was born to him. You find the Imam kept quiet about this, and in fact, gave him an opportunity to come and work in the house and to come and go, because the 11th Imam wanted to get an idea of what type of individual is he. If the Imam were to show his child to just anybody, naturally the authorities would be alerted as it relates to the existence of the 12th Imam. Therefore, the narration says that this man came to Samirra. He came to the house of the 11th Imam. And when he asked the 11th Imam to live with the Imam and be acquainted with the Imam gave him that permission. But it's mentioned nothing about a son existing. The man stayed with the 11th Imam for months, until at one point he says, eventually I became so comfortable with this household that one of those days the 11th Imam called me and he said, this is my son. He is the Mahdi and he will be the successor after me. You find Imam Hassan al-Askari is taking so much precaution in who he shows the 12th Imam to and who he keeps the 12th Imam hidden from. On another occasion, you read the Imam called 40 of his close companions to come and see the Mahdi. Even the 40 companions, when they showed up, some of them did not know what this gathering was about. The narration says, we all gathered in the house of Imam Hassan al-Askari, and when we gathered, we were wondering what's happening. We wanted to ask him, who's the successor after you? Before we could ask, he said, sit down and be calm. I know what you have come for. And he called his son to approach him from the other room, and he pointed to his son and said, this is your master. He will be my successor after I am gone. All of this precaution, why? Because of this severe surveillance around the household and the life of the 10th Imam, the 11th Imam, and by extension, the 12th Imam. And where did this present itself the most? In the tawqi'at and the letters that the 12th Imam was writing to the Shia, that the Shia were writing to them. If you think about it, if you want to guide an ummah, you want to guide a community, and your only way of communicating with that community is through letters that have to go through multiple individuals, this makes life very difficult. This was the only way the Imam could communicate with the Shia at that time. Therefore, the letters were going back and forth between the Imam and between the Shia. This critical period of time was the cause of Ahl Bayt was so vulnerable that you find scholars had to step up their game. Therefore, many of the early books of hadith that we have were written during this period of time, in the time of Ghaybatul Sughra and a little bit after Ghaybatul Sughra. Many of us have heard of the book Al-Kafi. The author of Al-Kafi is living during the time of Ghaybatul Sughra. Many of us have heard, for example, of Shaykh Tusi. Many of us have heard of other authors. They all occurred 3rd century, 4th century, 5th century, very close to the time of Ghaybatul Sughra. Why? Because this was the time where the message of the Shia school of thought was the most vulnerable of all times. And this is why Shaykh al-Saduq took pen to paper and began to author different works of hadith, particularly within this time period. Of those books of hadith is a book called Kamaluddin wa Tamamun Ni'mah. This is a 2-volume work of Shaykh al-Saduq in which he narrates a multitude of different ahadith about the 12th Imam. Why did Shaykh al-Saduq write this book? He himself explains. The story goes as follows. He says, I had the opportunity one day to go and visit Khurasan, Mashhad, the grave of the 8th Imam, Imam al-Rida, salawatullahi wa salamuhu alayhi. He says, when I went to Mashhad, when I went to Khurasan, Tus, whatever we want to call it, I did the ziyarah. The Shia of Nayshabur, who's not so far from there, they all gathered around me and they had questions that they wanted to ask me. Of course, Shaykh al-Saduq was very well known within the Shi'i community. He says, I sat down with them and answered their questions, and I saw there's one major theme in all of their questions. That major theme is the idea of the 12th Imam and the occultation of the 12th Imam. This was their main struggle, this was their main issue. He says, I thought to myself that maybe I should write a book about this. This is the questions that the Shia have. Maybe I should put pen to paper, author a work about this. He says, I left Khurasan, I came to Qum. When I came to Qum, I met with a friend who was also a scholar. But he had less access to the ahadith the way I did. He started to ask me questions about the ahadith. Again, the common theme was what? The occultation of the 12th Imam. What's supposed to happen during this time? How are the Shia supposed to communicate with him? So on and so forth. He said, at this point, I thought to myself, that book that I was supposed to write, I should really write this book because everyone is asking questions about this issue. But I never put pen to paper until he says, and of course when he tells us a dream, it's very different from you and I telling dreams. Yes, our dreams are one thing. The dreams of Shaykh al-Saduq are two different things, yes? He said, one night I had a dream, and in that dream I saw the 12th Imam. He approached me. And when the 12th Imam approached me, he looked at me, he said, Muhammad ibn Ali, this was the name of Shaykh al-Saduq. He said, why don't you author a work and a book specifically on the narrations that have to do with our occultation and the occultation of previous prophets, meaning the times where other prophets left their people and came back, like Musa alayhi salam, like Yunus alayhi salam, and a number of other prophets as well. Shaykh al-Saduq says, I turned to the 12th Imam, I said, but I've written some treaties about this. Treaties were smaller in length. They were like papers, imagine, yes? Said, I've already written some things about it. The Imam told him, no, you have to write a full work on this. You have to write a full book on this. Why? Because the Shia had so many questions about this critical period of history. And that is why Shaykh al-Saduq then says, I woke up and I began writing the work that is today Kamaluddin and Tamamun Ni'mah. Therefore, this period was extremely crucial for the Ahlul Bayt, and the scholars had to step up their game to make up for this gap and this void that existed. Alongside these scholars, there were, of course, 4 representatives of the 12th Imam who played a very critical and important role. But very seldom do we sit down to study the lives of these 4 and the lessons that can be learned from each of these 4 representatives of the 12th Imam. Who were these 4 representatives and what roles did they play? We'll get into that inshallah with a loud salawat ala Muhammadin wa ali Muhammad. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad. The first of those representatives, his name was Uthman ibn Sa'id. Very, very important character. He was also a representative of the 10th Imam and 11th Imam, and then continued to play that role for the 12th Imam as well. Uthman ibn Sa'id begins to play this role. Letters are brought to him. He takes those letters, delivers them to the 12th Imam. The 12th Imam replies to those letters. He sends those letters back to the Shia and continues to play this role. For about 6 to 7 years, he played this role. But there's something very important, because these letters that are going between the Imam and the Shia are on a wide variety of topics. They're not on 1 or 2 topics. There are fiqhi matters that the Shia are asking, halal and haram, should I pray at this time? Should I fast at this time? When I go for Hajj, what should I do? So on and so forth. There are questions about aqa'id, the belief system. Do we believe in this? Do we not believe in this? So on and so forth. There are questions about akhlaq and manners and behavior that they ask the Imam. And there were also times where there were particular situations that they had questions about, particular characters, particular figures who had become dominant in society. So many times you will find letters from the 12th Imam where he says, so-and-so individual does not represent me. So-and-so individual does represent me. This was a common theme. Wonderful. For 7 years, Uthman ibn Sa'id, the first representative, is taking letters and sending letters back, yes? But what lesson can you and I learn from his life? This is the first of those lessons. When you look into history, Uthman, beyond the titles that he had another title that people knew him by. And that title was As-Samman, the one who sells oil. So wait a second, representative of the 12th Imam, selling oil. I thought this is a full-time situation, yes? Like resident alim. This is what his title should be. What is this? Selling oil and so on and so forth. The first representative, because of the humility that he had at one hand, and on the other hand, the secrecy that he had to keep in order to make sure nobody knows about these letters, had taken on an occupation and a job as a cover so that others would not know that he takes letters with him and brings back letters with him. This is a big lesson to learn from this. So in society, his thing was, he would go out in society with the different pits of oil, yes, selling oil. And amongst the customers comes this Shia person, comes that Shia person, and in the pits of oil, put what? Put letters. So some of the oil that he was carrying from one corner to another corner, the first representative was in fact carrying letters that would go to the 12th Imam. And then this Shia person would come back to buy more oil, and now he's getting the response to his letter. This was the level of secrecy that the first representative had. Now, I want you to imagine this. If you're living in society, yes, and you don't know about all these details, and you see someone selling oil, I mean, that's a typical occupation, a typical job. Maybe you cross by that person and you think, you know what? That person's not even important. It's an average person. But in reality, he's one of the closest to the 12th Imam. The lesson to learn from this is that in today's world and in our lives, you never know who's who. You might come across a person and think this person is not very special in the eyes of God. In fact, he's the most special person in the eyes of God. You might come across an individual, think, oh, this person, God doesn't really care about him. In fact, God cares about him a lot. You might come across an individual and think, what has this person done for the Imam anyways? Then later on, you look into his life, you see sacrifices that he made for the Imam and for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that you and I have never made in our lives. You don't know. You don't know who's a close friend of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and who's not. So what did the Ahl Bayt teach us? The Ahl Bayt teach us that you deal with everyone as if they are a close friend of Allah. What does that mean? The respect that you show, the honor that you show, the way you show hospitality to someone. And if they told you, Ayatollah Sistani is coming to our house tonight, what's the household gonna do? Everyone is gonna get together. Oh, let's prepare. What's the best sweets we have? Prepare that, yes? What's the best clothes we have to wear? Let's prepare that. Let's make the house completely clean, yes? Prepare it fully. But if now they told you, oh, so-and-so is gonna come, do you show that same level of hospitality? You don't show that same level of hospitality. Sometimes because you look at that individual and you say, Baba, he's not too much of a big deal. The first representative of the Imam, there were people who might have come across him and said, you know what? This guy just sells oil. He's not a big deal. He's not a big shot. But in reality, he's the most important of all of the companions of the 12th Imam. This is the first of the lessons to learn about the first representative. Aloud salawat, please. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ala Muhammad. Now, was he an important person? Yes. You find when Imam Askari passed away, was martyred, who came to do the kafn and dafna? Many of us have heard that the salat of one Imam can only be done by another Imam. And this is very true. All of our scholars agree on this. So the salat of the 11th Imam was done by the 12th Imam. The kafn and the dafna, who helped out with it? This first representative helped out with it. This was the role that he had. But imagine people came across him in society. They didn't even know who he was. He had reached a status, this is the level of humility. He had reached a status that the 10th Imam and the 11th Imam, both of them, they said, if you want to hear something as if it's coming from us, go to Uthman ibn Sa'id. Imagine two ma'soom imams, infallible imams. They say what? They say we have so much trust in this individual, whatever he says, it's like we're saying it. Okay, very critical. That's why companions came to him. They wanted to ask him questions, Uthman ibn Sa'id. Before they were going to ask him the question, they said, Uthman, first let us tell you what two ma'soom imams have said about you. He said, go ahead. They said, you know, when we asked Imam Hadi who we should listen to, he said, Uthman thiqati. Uthman is my confidant. Whatever he says, it's like I'm saying it. When we asked Imam Hassan Askari who we should go to, he said, Uthman is my confidant, 11th Imam. Whatever he delivers to you, it's as if I am delivering that to you. The narration says, when they said this to Uthman, to the first representative, what happened? He began to cry. Tears started to roll down from his face. and he fell to sajda out of thankfulness to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. This was the status that the first representative had, yes? But in society, how did he carry himself? Did he walk around and I'm the first representative? This is not how he carried himself. Now imagine if you and I had a role like that. Yes? Would we be able to keep it secret at all? Would we be able to be quiet about it? No. Yes? There's a story. They say this guy was in the masjid. He was praying. As he was praying, he prolonged his prayer a little bit. Yes? He was really doing the qira'ah. Ihdina as-sirata al-mustaqim. Very religious. Yes? So he kept reciting. Slowly he heard people gathering behind him. Yes? They said, oh, look, his salat is going so long. MashaAllah, subhanallah. He's so religious, he's so spiritual. He heard the noise that was happening behind him. He said, well, I have to take advantage of this opportunity, yes? He said, well, let me prolong my salat even more. Now he was doing all the tajweed in his salat too, yes? وَلَضَّالِّينَ. And the longer he went, the more he heard the people behind him, MashaAllah, can you hear this salat? Look at how long his salat takes. So on and so forth. It continued. Finally, he went to qunut, prolonged his qunut. He heard people even more. They said, wow, he must be doing so many amazing things. He's such a spiritual individual. And this is you and I, right? At one point, he couldn't take it anymore. In the middle of qunut, he turned around and said, you guys don't know, I'm also fasting, by the way. They said, Baba, your salat is batil now. This is how we are. And if we did something in the middle of our salat, we'll turn around, by the way, I'm fasting too. This is how we are. But the first representative, the humility that he carried himself with. A loud salawat, please. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ala Muhammad. Then the time came, after 7 years, the first representative passed away. His son, Muhammad ibn Uthman. First one, Uthman ibn Sa'id. Second one, his son, Muhammad ibn Uthman. When Muhammad ibn Uthman was going to begin this, they received a letter from the 12th Imam in which it said, O Muhammad, your father lived a wonderful life. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala blessed him with a great blessing, and that great blessing is you. You are that blessing that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala blessed your father with. And from now on, the communications are going to come from me to you. What stands out about this second representative? He played the role of representative of the 12th Imam for 40 years. 40 years. 40 years of service. 40 years of consistency. And during these 40 years, there was no task that the Imam would tell him to do and he would consider it too small or too, minor for him to take care of. So other companions used to come and they had to take care of things, and they used to sit back and say, why are you telling us to do this? This is too small for me. Give me something more important. Give me a more critical role. But the representative, Muhammad, he used to say, this is what I've been told to do, we do it. So the narrator came, he said, Muhammad ibn Uthman, the second representative, called me. He said, come, I need you to take care of something. I went to him. When I went to him, he gave me a bag of money, dirham. And he gave me a bag of cloth. He said, take these two to this particular location. When you get there, the first person that you meet over there is going to take the money and is going to take the cloth from you as well. The narrator himself says, when he told me to do this, I thought to myself, Baba, what role is this? Yani go over there, take a little bag of money and take some cloth. And I thought to myself, this is not becoming of me. What role is this? I said, fine, because the representative is asking me, yani I'll do it, no problem. He says, I got on my horse, I went to that location. When I got to that location, someone approached me, asked my name, I introduced myself. When I introduced myself, he said, I know who you are. You're associated with Muhammad ibn Uthman, aren't you? I said, yes, he's the one who sent me. He said, give us the money and give us the cloth that you've brought with yourself. I handed it over to him. I said, what is this money and this cloth for anyways? He said, yes, one of our Shia passed away. We didn't have the money for his kafn and dafn, and we didn't have the cloth to have him shrouded. Muhammad ibn Uthman knew about this, He sent you with this money and with this cloth. The lesson to learn from the life of the second representative is a life of service. There are people in this world, they are part of the solution. There are people, they're not part of the solution. Sometimes they're part of the problem and the burden. Muhammad ibn Uthman, 40 years, a life of service. Now I ask you and I, in our houses, in our communities, in whatever capacity, are you the one who serves others, or are you the one who's a burden on others? This is a serious question. If I want to know when the 12th Imam comes, will I serve him or will I be a burden on him? Well, one of the indications of that is how I'm living my life right now. Right now, am I a person of service for the Ahlul Bayt, or am I a burden for them? Constantly they have to worry about me. Constantly my family has to take care of my issues. Yes? You know, in every household, siblings, yes? I don't want to create too many problems tonight, yeah? Siblings, some of them are people who solve other problems. Some of them are burden for the family. Some siblings, they're always thinking, how can I help out my parents? How can I help out my other siblings? Other siblings, they create problems in the house. Yani this is the balance, right? This is how it works. Muhammad ibn Uthman played this type of role. And of the other lessons to be learned from him was the way he prepared for his akhirah. The narration says, when we came to visit Muhammad ibn Uthman, he had dug up his own grave. And he would sit in his own grave in preparation months ahead. He used to recite Quran because he knew that that is where eventually he's going to be headed. Someone who feared Allah like this. Now question, Muhammad ibn Uthman, was he a normal sinner like you and me? No, Muhammad ibn Uthman, the second representative, had 10 other representatives just in the city of Baghdad working for him. Just in Baghdad. The Shia at that time were in different corners of the world. Some in Khurasan, some in Qom, some in Yemen, some in Kufa, some in Baghdad. Just in Baghdad, 10 representatives worked and reported to Muhammad ibn Uthman. But when it came to his relationship with Allah, he himself would sit inside of his grave, reciting verses of the Quran in preparation that he knows the time of his death is going to come. Yes? The lesson from the second representative is, are you a service or are you a burden? A loud salawat, please. The second representative, 40 years. Third representative, Hussein ibn Ruh, who was one of the students of this second representative. He began his wakala. He began to represent the 12th Imam. Hussein ibn Ruh had a very important characteristic. That characteristic was this. He was well known not just amongst the Shia. The non-Shia were also impressed with his character. Everyone knew who Hussein ibn Ruh al-Nawbakhti was. This was the type of character that the representatives of the 12th Imam had. They used to shine in such a way that not just those who are already in the path of Ahlul Bayt knew them and admired them, but also those who were not in this path. So now question for you and I, is that how we live our lives? Is that the type of role that we play? So you're going to college, obviously you have Muslims who are not Shia. Yes? Dominant majority are not Shia. Does your character shine amongst these characters? You have friends who you grew up with, they're Sunni, they're not Shia. Okay, great. Does your character shine? Do they look up to you? Do they say, yes, you know, him, and he follows a different faith and a different school of thought, yes, but his character, is that what they say? That's how these representatives were. When the time of salat comes, do they look up to you and say, oh, look at his salat? When the time of Quran comes, the time of fasting comes, the time of charity comes, the time of service comes, does your character shine amongst the other characters? You say, I'm Shia, I'm follower of Ahlul Bayt, I'm different from the others. Correct. In your school of thought, in your faith, you are different. And one of the ways you were supposed to be different is that you were supposed to shine brighter than others. That's how Hussein ibn Ruh was. Every school of thought looked at Hussein ibn Ruh and was impressed with his character. This was the first of lessons to be learned from Hussein ibn Ruh. And because he had such a high status, he was the individual who, when people wanted a dua to be done for them by the 12th Imam, they used to come to Hussein ibn Ruh. They used to ask him to ask the 12th Imam to pray for them. And of those who came and asked him to pray for them was the father of Shaykh al-Saduq. The father of Shaykh al-Saduq was struggling to have a child. At one point, he came to Hussein ibn Ruh, the third representative. He said, I want you to ask the 12th Imam to do a dua for me, so that I will be granted and blessed with a child. Hussein ibn Ruh went, asked the 12th Imam, came back. He said 3 days later, he came to me. He said, this is a done deal. You will be granted a child. Which child did this become? This became that child who is now known as Shaykh al-Saduq, the author of a multitude of books of hadith. And Shaykh al-Saduq himself says, I used to sit in the class of our teacher, and as the teacher used to speak, I used to respond to him. The elders in the community, they would look at me and they would say, you know what? Of course he has knowledge like this. He was born with the dua of the 12th Imam. Loud salawat, please. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa Muhammad. This status, and then Hussein ibn Ruh, the secrecy that he had. He does not speak unless the 12th Imam gives him permission. The obedience that he showed to this cause. So they asked another great scholar, Abu Sahl al-Nawbakhti. They said, Abu Sahl, how come you didn't become the representative? You're knowledgeable. You know everything about Shiism. You're close to the Imam. How come you didn't become the representative and Hussein ibn Ruh became the representative? Look at the response that he gave. And this, brothers and sisters, is the difference between the close servants of God and the servants who are good servants of God. And if you want to see where I fall and where you fall, this is the difference, the obedience. How come he became representative? How come you didn't become the representative? You know what he said? He said, listen, I'm a theologian. I can defend the cause of the Ahlul Bayt. I can argue for them. I can speak out for them. But he said, you know what might happen? I get so emotional in my arguments and in my debates that at one point, if this person doesn't accept that the 12th Imam actually exists, I might lose it and say, this is where he is if you want to go see him. But Hussein ibn Ruh, if the 12th Imam was under his clothing and under his aba, and they cut him to pieces with scissors, he would not speak of where the 12th Imam is. He said, this is the level of obedience that Hussein ibn Ruh had. Yes? And then there came time for the fourth and the final of those representatives. His name was Muhammad, Ali ibn Muhammad as-Samuri. The letter came from the 12th Imam. Ya Ali ibn Muhammad as-Samuri, now after 3 years of being wakil, the time of your death has come near. This is nearly 69 years put together. Yes? First representative, 7 years. Second one, 40 years. Third one, 20 years. Final one, 3 years. If you put the math together, close to 70 years. The letter came because the Ghaybatul Sughra is going to end now. This is the final representative. Yes? The letter came. Look at the lesson to be learned from the life of the fourth representative. Ya Ali ibn Muhammad as-Samuri. The letter came, the letter read, Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. And this is the letter of the 12th Imam. It said, in the name of Allah, the most compassionate, the most merciful. Ya Ali ibn Muhammad as-Samuri. O Ali ibn Muhammad Samuri. A'zam Allahu ajra ikhwanaka feek. May Allah reward your brothers because they are going to go through a calamity because of you. In other words, you're going to leave this world. They will be left with your tragedy of leaving this world. May Allah reward them. فَإِنَّكَ مَيِّتٌ بَيْنَكَ وَبَيْنَ السِّتَّةِ أَيَّامٍ. From now until 6 days from now, you will leave this world. Then the Imam said something, it's a lesson for all of us. He said, Ya Ali ibn Muhammad, فَجْمَعْ أَمْرَكَ. Gather your affairs together. Prepare. A question. Ali ibn Muhammad al-Samuri, will he ever see the zuhur and the reappearance of the 12th Imam? No, he will never see. He's leaving this world already. The Imam has not reappeared, yes? But what will he definitely see? He will see Malikul Maut. He will see and have to prepare for his akhirah. He will have to prepare for his death. And that's why scholars teach us, you may not necessarily see the return of the 12th Imam. But what you will definitely see is when Malikul Maut comes to visit you and I. So the preparation for the 12th Imam, the first step of it is preparation for Malikul Maut. Preparation for the things that I have to gather before I leave this world. Maybe dhuhur I see, maybe dhuhur I don't see. God knows best, yes? But what you will definitely experience, Malikul Maut is going to come and visit us. So the Imam told him, Ya Ali ibn Muhammad, fajma' amrak, gather your affairs. Any loose ends, yes? Cross your T's, dot your I's, as we say. What does that mean for you and I? Fajma' amrak, gather your affairs. What does that mean? Sometimes it means there's apologies you had to give to some people. You haven't given those apologies yet. Sometimes for some of us, that's what it means. Sometimes it means this haram income that I have, I need to stop. Sometimes it means this salat and fasting that I have never made up for. I have to go start making up for it, yes? Sometimes it means this debts that I have to this person, I have to go take care of. And these are cans that we continue to kick down the road. But the 12th Imam told his companion, Fajma' amrak, gather your affairs, prepare yourself. You're leaving this world within 6 days. And that is a lesson for you and I as well. Ask yourself, what does gathering my affairs mean for me? What does that mean for me? Does that mean you have to call this relative and tell them that I apologize for that time I wronged you? Maybe that's what it is. You know best and I know best. Everyone knows best what that preparation is for. If you and I prepare for that time of death, when the time of death comes, it will feel like to you and I that it came exactly at the right time. Because you're prepared for it. So this is what I was preparing for. The Quran says the time of death for every person, لا يستأخرون ساعة ولا يستقدمون. It comes at exactly the right time. Doesn't come early, doesn't come late. But for the person who is prepared, for the person who's not prepared, it feels like it came too soon. And this is why the Quran says there are those فَإِذَا جَاءَ, when the time of their death comes, أَحَدُهُمُ الْمَوْتِ قَالَ رَبِّ ارْجِعُونَ, he says, oh Allah, take me back. Why? You didn't prepare for this time? No, he didn't prepare for it. لَعَلِّ أَعْمَلُ صَالِحًا فِيمَا تَرَكْتُ. Take a look at what the verse says. The verse says, send me back so that I can do one good deed. And this is how desperate he is at this point. لَعَلِّ أَعْمَلُ صَالِحًا. Send me back so I can do this one good deed, فِيمَا تَرَكْتُ, amongst the things that I'm leaving behind. But the call comes, كَلَّا إِنَّهَا كَلِمَةٌ هُوَ قَائِلُهَا. This is the time of your death, and this is the time that you have to go. The 12th Imam told his companion, Ya Ali ibn Muhammad, فَجْمَعْ أَمْرَكَ. Then he continued, he said, فَقَدْ بَدَأَتِ الْغَيْبَةِ التَّامَّةِ. Because the comprehensive occultation will now begin. This is the second occultation. He said, فَلَا ظُهُورَ, the reappearance will not take place إِلَّا بَعْدَ إِذْنِ اللَّهِ, until when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gives permission for it. وَقَسْوَةِ الْقُلُوبِ, and until the hearts become hard with sin. وَطُولِ الْأَمَدِ, and until many years pass. And then he continued, he said, Ya Ali ibn Muhammad, during this time, there will be those who will come to my Shia, and they will say they are constantly in touch with me. Allah, no, فَمَنِ ادَّعَ الْمُشَاهَدَةِ, the one who comes and says he's in touch with me, فَهُوَ كَاذِبٌ مُفْتَرٌ. Know that he is the greatest of liars. And the letter ends there. The lessons to be learned from these representatives. Who else played these critical roles? Hakima, the sister of Imam al-Hadi, played critical roles. She also was playing the role of a connection between the Shia and the Ahl Bayt. Who else played the role? The wife of Imam al-Hadi, Hudayth was her name. She was also the connection as well. These were all of those who were loyal to the cause of the Ahlul Bayt in the most difficult and vulnerable of situations. And then there were those who in the most difficult situations turned their back on the 12th Imam. Who was this person? A companion of the 12th Imam. He started out as one of the closest companions of the 12th Imam. When the four representatives, some of them would get together to have meetings, they used to have their meetings in the house of this person. This was his status. Name is Shalmaghani. Shalmaghani. They used to come to him. The Shia's houses were full of his books. Because when he went on the wrong path, the narrations say they came to the representatives and they say, what should we do? Now he's gone on the wrong path. But our houses are full of his books. How are we supposed to deal with that situation? What does that tell you? That tells you he was not just a close companion. He was a scholar and he was playing such a role for the Shia that their houses were full of his books. Is it possible someone starts out like this and then leaves the faith altogether? It's possible. This is what Shaitan does. He's been doing it for a long time. You and I, of course, are naive, but Shaitan is not naive in what he does. So Shalmaghani began. He was during the time of the third representative, Hussein ibn Ruh. As Hussein ibn Ruh had to hide at times because of the persecution, Shalmaghani started to play a more important role. And you know what? He thought to himself, I can do this on my own. And I don't need this person to be between me and so on and so forth. So slowly his opinion started to grow. His opinion started to grow, which was what? Yes, you know, these representatives of the 12th Imam, they themselves have a part of the soul of the Imams and the Prophets in them. This was his first step. Then his second step was, you know what? Actually, I'm not the representative of a representative. I am the representative myself. Then he developed a little bit more until at one point, when Hussein ibn Ruh, the third representative, was imprisoned, he was in prison. And he imagined the most vulnerable of times. What did he do? He came forward and said, listen, all of these letters that you get from the 12th Imam, quote unquote, I wrote them myself. Undermining the whole faith. Shalmaghani reached a point, at one point, the 12th Imam wrote a letter for him and said, Mal'oonun mal'oon. Cursed is who? Shalmaghani. He does not represent us anymore and he has left our faith. And this is what Shaitan does, brothers and sisters. This is why the Quran says, Ya ayyuhalladhina amanu, la tattabi'u khutuwat ash-shaytan. O you who believe, do not follow the footsteps of Shaitan. Why the footsteps? And he just come and say, don't follow Shaitan. Because all of the Mufassirin have said what? Because that's what Shaitan does. He leaves footsteps for you first. Slowly. Don't come from the beginning and deny everything. First, upgrade your opinion a little bit. First come up with this, then after a while this, then after a while this. Before you know it, you're in a situation where you've completely left the faith altogether. Hence, we end with the verse that we started the lecture with. إِنَّ اللَّهَ عِنْدَهُ عِلْمُ السَّاعَةِ. The time of the day of judgment belongs to Allah. وَيُنَزِّلُ الْغَيْثِ. And He is the one who sends down rain. وَيَعْلَمُ مَا فِي الْأَرْحَامِ. He knows what lies in the wombs of mothers. And then what does the verse say? وَمَا تَدْرِي نَفْسٌ مَاذَا تَكْسِبُ غَدًا. Nobody knows what they're going to do tomorrow. You can start out as a close companion of the 12th Imam. Then in the future, what lies ahead of you? We don't know. That is why we have to practice precaution. وَمَا تَدْرِي نَفْسٌ مَاذَا تَكْسِبُ غَدًا وَمَا تَدْرِي نَفْسٌ بِأَيِّ أَرْضٍ تَمُوتُ. No one knows where or how they're going to take their final breath. إِنَّ اللَّهَ عَلِيمٌ خَبِيرٌ. Only Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala knows. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, by the right of our beloved 12th Imam, by the right of all of these righteous servants of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and these righteous representatives of the Imam, that He makes us amongst those whose final breaths are final breaths that we take in the right path, inshallah. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that all of those who have difficulty, who are in pain, our brothers and sisters in Palestine, with everything that's been happening, this painful, difficult footage that we see coming out of Palestine, we ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that sooner rather than later He alleviates their pain and difficulty, inshallah. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that all of those on this auspicious night who have hajat, they have requests, they have things that they've kept in their heart, maybe they've never told anybody else, may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala grant them all of their hajat, inshaAllah. And finally, last but not least, and of the utmost of priority for us, the return of our beloved 12th Imam, bin Nabiyyi wa alih, rahimallahu man qara'a surat al-Fatiha, ma'a as-salawati ala Muhammadin wa ali Muhammad.